Alien girl asked the human not to leave yet, and what she showed him wasn't a wound, but trust. I can't explain how long we sat there, both of us trying to avoid the obvious tension that hung in the air like a heavy mist. The wind outside howled, battering the shelter with its fury, but inside, there was a strange sense of calm. Lyra, despite her stoic appearance, seemed to be silently processing everything that had happened. She had stopped shaking, her body's tremors now a distant memory, but I knew there was more to her than the warrior exterior. She had shown me trust in a way I hadn't expected. Her vulnerability, something I wasn't used to seeing in my line of work, had broken through her walls. We sat together in silence for a while, and I couldn't help but notice the way the dim light of the shelter caught the soft glow of her skin, almost ethereal against the dark backdrop of the storm. "You're different," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words caught me off guard. I turned to look at her, my eyes narrowing slightly, trying to read her expression. "Different from the others," she clarified, looking up at me. "Human warriors, they would leave me behind. They would see a weak link, a liability." Her eyes flicked down to her hands, which were still curled tightly in her lap, almost as though she were ashamed of her words. I wasn't sure how to respond. I didn't see her as a liability, not in the way she thought I would. Lyra was a warrior, yes, but she was also something else, a person who had seen too much loss. I had seen that in her eyes when we first met. It wasn't about strength, it was about survival. But maybe she was right. Maybe the others wouldn't have stayed. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm not like them," I said quietly, not sure if it was the right thing to say, but saying it anyway. "I don't leave people behind. Not when it matters." There was a long pause before she responded. When she finally spoke again, her voice was stronger, less uncertain. "You think you're the first to say that?" Her words held no bitterness, just a quiet challenge. I wasn't sure if she was testing me, or if she was simply making an observation. But whatever it was, it made me pause. "No," I admitted after a moment. "I don't think I'm the first, but I still mean it." She studied me for a long while, and in that silence, I felt something shift between us. It wasn't romantic. Not yet, anyway, but it was a bond, forged in something deeper than just survival. She looked away for a moment, her gaze drifting to the door, as though listening to the storm outside. The wind was starting to die down, but the silence in here was just as thick. When she turned back to me, there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see the sincerity in her gaze, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she truly realized just how much she had already given me. She had given me trust, and for a human like me, that was more than enough. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. The words didn't seem enough, but they were all I had. "You don't need to thank me," I said simply. "I'm not going anywhere. Not until you're ready." The storm outside finally began to settle, the winds dying down to a gentle whisper, and the silence between us deepened. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Not anymore. We had made a silent agreement. We weren't alone anymore. Not really. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't just protecting her. She was protecting me too. I didn't know how much time had passed. The storm outside had died down, leaving behind an eerie calm that seemed to stretch on forever. Inside, the only sound was the crackling of the small fire I had started, its warm glow dancing off the stone walls. Lyra had fallen asleep not long after our conversation, her breathing steady but soft, almost fragile in the stillness of the night. I kept my distance, not wanting to disturb her, but I couldn't help but watch her, trying to make sense of everything. Her trust, her vulnerability, it was all so new to me. I had been through battles, had seen enemies fall, but none of it felt as real as the moment we shared. She wasn't just an alien, a soldier, or a prisoner. She was a person. I wasn't sure when the shift had happened. Perhaps it was the moment I chose to stay, or when I saw the glimmer of something deeper in her eyes. It was hard to say. The truth was, I had no idea what I was doing here. I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a healer, but somehow, I had become something more. I had become the one person she could trust, and that realization weighed heavily on me. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about what we were to each other, even in this strange, alien world. I stood up quietly, careful not to wake her, and walked over to the small table where our supplies were scattered. My mind was racing, but I kept my movements deliberate, trying to keep myself grounded. My hands fumbled with the canteen for a moment before I took a long drink. The cool water helped clear my mind for a second. I thought about what had led me here, the mission that had gone wrong, the crash landing on this unforgiving planet. We were stuck, but we weren't alone anymore. At least, not completely. I glanced back at Lyra, her figure still curled up under the thin blanket I had found earlier. Her alien features seemed less threatening now, more familiar. The way her breathing rose and fell so steadily made her seem more human, more real. I couldn't help but feel a protective instinct rise up within me. It wasn't just the job anymore. I wasn't just trying to survive this planet or get off it. I wanted to make sure she was okay. For some reason, the thought of leaving her behind didn't seem possible. And yet, that was exactly what we both had to face. The reality of our situation. We couldn't stay here forever. Lyra needed help. And as much as I wanted to protect her from the world, I knew that we had to find a way out. The next day came sooner than I expected. The sun had risen, casting a faint golden light through the cracks in the shelter. I looked over at Lyra, who was still asleep, her face peaceful for once. I didn't want to wake her, but there was no time to waste. We had to move. I went to the corner of the shelter where my gear was, checking everything one more time. The communication device was still down, and the emergency beacon wasn't working, but that didn't matter now. I wasn't sure what we were going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. We couldn't stay here. I could feel my pulse quicken as I prepared to make a decision. I had to do something. It wasn't just about getting her out. It was about getting us both out. I couldn't let her down now, not when she had already shown me so much trust. And I couldn't help but feel that, despite everything, we were starting something. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was survival, but whatever it was, I couldn't walk away from it. Not now. I stood in the dim light of the shelter, watching Lyra as she slowly woke up. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief moment, I could see the remnants of the fear and doubt that had clouded her expression before. But this time, when she looked at me, there was something different, something that made my heart beat a little faster. "You're up early," she said, her voice rough from sleep, but still carrying that familiar strength I had come to recognize. I nodded, taking a step toward her. "We need to move," I said, my tone firm. "We can't stay here much longer. The storm has passed, but we don't know how long the weather will stay clear." She sat up, pushing the blanket off of her, her movements slow but deliberate. Her face was calm, almost serene, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She was still recovering, still in pain, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. She never did. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite the weakness in her body. I hesitated for a moment, looking out at the barren landscape beyond the shelter. We had no way of knowing what was out there, but we couldn't just sit here and wait. "I'll get the emergency beacon working. See if we can get any communication out," I said. "You're not in any condition to travel far, so I'll head out first. I'll come back for you as soon as I can. We'll find a way off this planet." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally nodding. "Be careful," she said quietly. "I'll wait for you." There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation. She trusted me, even when we both knew the odds were against us. That trust, that unspoken bond we had formed, made the weight of the situation a little easier to bear. I nodded and turned toward my gear, checking over the supplies one last time. As I moved, I glanced back at her. She was watching me, her eyes following every movement. There was something about her gaze, something that made me feel like I wasn't alone, even in the vast emptiness of this alien world. "I'll be back soon," I said, trying to sound reassuring, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. She nodded again, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "I'll be here." I took one last look at her, then stepped outside into the cold, alien landscape. The air was crisp, the ground beneath my boots frozen and hard. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the emergency beacon in my hand. As I walked, my mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. What if the beacon didn't work? What if no one responded? What if I couldn't find a way back to her? But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. I had made a promise, and I wasn't going to break it. I had to find a way to bring her back to safety. Hours passed, and the world around me seemed to grow darker, colder. The winds had picked up again, howling through the barren landscape, carrying with it a sense of urgency. I couldn't waste any more time. I had to keep moving. And when I finally reached the spot where I hoped the signal would be strong enough to send out a distress call, I stopped, taking a deep breath and looking around. The desolate, frozen world stretched out before me, empty and cold. It was the perfect place for someone to disappear, to be forgotten. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to her. I set up the beacon, making sure everything was in place. The seconds felt like minutes as I waited for the signal to go out. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, the silence so loud it felt almost suffocating. Then, the small device hummed to life, its light blinking steadily. I couldn't help but let out a breath of relief. It was working. I turned and made my way back, the wind whipping around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of urgency. I had to get back to her. She was waiting, and somehow, I knew she would be there, just like she said. I had to get back to her, no matter the cost. I pushed through the bitter wind, every step heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The journey back felt longer than I had imagined, the chill creeping into my bones, making every movement feel like it required double the effort. The distress signal had gone out, but that didn't mean help was on the way. There was no guarantee we'd be rescued, no promise that I'd make it back to Lyra. The landscape stretched out before me, an endless stretch of frozen terrain, barren and unforgiving. But as I walked, I held on to the one thing that kept me going, the thought of her waiting for me. She trusted me now, and I couldn't fail her. The wind howled louder, the sound almost like a warning. The cold bit through my clothes, but I pushed on, my thoughts only on the shelter we had left behind. I couldn't stop. I had to get back to her. When I finally arrived at the shelter, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It was different from the usual calm that came with the end of the storm. It felt too quiet, almost unnerving. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, expecting to find Lyra still there, waiting. But to my shock, the shelter was empty. There were no signs of her, no trace of her presence. My breath hitched, panic starting to rise in my chest. Had something happened? Had she left? Or worse, had she been taken? I ran to the bed, my eyes scanning the room for any clues, any sign that she had been there just moments ago. There was nothing. No footprints in the dust, no sign of struggle, just an eerie emptiness that made my stomach twist in knots. I had to stay calm. I couldn't let fear take control. I checked the exit, but the door was still securely fastened. She couldn't have gone far. I stepped outside, scanning the area around the shelter. There was no sign of her anywhere. The wind had picked up again, but there were no footprints in the snow. She hadn't gone out that way. I walked around the perimeter, searching the nearby rocks and crevices for any sign of movement. There was nothing. Then I heard it. A faint noise, almost like a whisper, carried on the wind. It was coming from the ridge to the east. I didn't hesitate. I broke into a run, my legs pushing through the thick snow as I followed the sound. As I crested the ridge, I saw her. Lyra was standing at the edge of a cliff, her back to me, looking out over the vast expanse of the frozen wasteland. For a moment, I just watched her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She was facing the horizon, her shoulders slightly hunched against the wind, but she wasn't moving. I called out to her, my voice carried away by the wind, but she didn't turn. Panic flooded through me, but I fought to keep my voice steady as I shouted again. Lyra. This time, she turned. Her eyes met mine, and I could see the mixture of emotions in them. Relief, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite place. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching me as I approached. When I was close enough, I stopped, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What are you doing? I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just looked at me, her eyes searching my face as if she were looking for something. I thought I had to be alone, she finally said, her voice barely audible over the wind. But I was wrong. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never seen her so vulnerable, so unsure of herself. She had always been the one to hold everything together, the warrior who never showed weakness. But now, standing there in the snow, she was just a person who had lost so much and was afraid of losing even more. I took a step closer to her, reaching out a hand. You don't have to be alone, I said softly. She didn't move at first, but after a moment, she took a step toward me, her hand trembling as she reached out. I closed the distance between us, wrapping my arms around her. She hesitated for a moment, But then, finally, she leaned into me, her body shaking. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered into her ear. "Not ever." And in that moment, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. No matter the odds, no matter the danger, we were no longer alone. I woke up to the sound of the wind howling outside again. The shelter was colder than usual, and the warmth of the fire had long since faded. I glanced over at Lyra, who was still asleep, her face serene but pale. The night had passed without incident, but I knew we couldn't afford to rest for too long. I had to figure out our next move. The beacon had sent the signal, but there was still no sign of help, no response, and no way to know when or if anyone would arrive. The days felt like they were stretching on endlessly, the time between the storm and the brief moments of calm starting to blur together. I stood up quietly, not wanting to wake Lyra yet, and walked over to check the status of the emergency beacon once more. The device was still flashing its weak signal, but I knew it wouldn't last much longer. We needed to find another way out, a backup plan, in case the rescue didn't come. As I knelt by the device, my thoughts drifted back to the moment when I had found Lyra standing alone on the cliff. I couldn't shake the memory of her eyes, so full of fear, and yet, when she looked at me, I had seen something else. Trust. She had shown me something I hadn't expected, and in turn, I had promised to stay. I couldn't go back on that. The thought of leaving her behind, especially now, seemed impossible. I glanced over at her again, her soft breathing the only sound in the room. She trusted me, and I couldn't let her down. I grabbed the small pack of supplies and strapped it to my back. I had to do something. I couldn't sit here waiting any longer. We had no food left, and our water was running low. If I didn't find a way to get us out, we would be stuck here, waiting for something that might never come. Lyra stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering as she began to wake. I turned toward her, trying to keep my expression neutral. "We need to move," I said softly. She blinked, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but she nodded slowly. "I know," she said quietly. "I'll be ready." The calmness in her voice surprised me. Despite everything, she was ready to face whatever came next. I walked over and helped her to her feet, steadying her as she winced slightly from the pain in her side. She wasn't fully healed yet, but I could see that she was determined to keep going. We had no choice. "We'll head west," I said, adjusting my pack. "The mountains are that way. There might be a way through. We can try to get to higher ground, see if we can find a signal." She didn't argue, just nodded again, and together, we began walking out of the shelter and into the cold. The wind was harsh, cutting through our clothes, but we pushed forward. The landscape was still mostly empty, just stretches of snow and rock, but I felt a strange sense of purpose as we moved. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about doing whatever it took to get out of here. We couldn't afford to wait around any longer. The mountains loomed ahead, towering over the landscape. The higher ground would give us a better view, a better chance at spotting any kind of rescue signal. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. We trudged through the snow, the wind howling louder, and with every step, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on us. The silence between us was comfortable, but I could sense that Lyra was thinking about something. I glanced over at her, catching the look of determination on her face. "We'll make it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She looked up at me, her eyes unwavering. "I know," she replied. "We will." And somehow, in that moment, I believed her. I could feel the weight of every step as we made our way toward the mountains. The wind was relentless, stinging our faces and biting through our clothing. Lyra was still moving strong, though I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't the cold or the terrain that slowed her down. It was the constant strain on her body. She wasn't fully healed, not by a long shot. Her injuries had left scars deeper than the ones on her skin, and it was all I could do to keep her moving. We walked in silence for what felt like hours, the sound of the wind drowning out any other noise. My mind was constantly scanning the horizon, looking for any signs of life, any hint of movement. The bleakness of the landscape stretched endlessly before us. I glanced at Lyra, her features still sharp, even through the exhaustion. She didn't complain, didn't say a word about how much pain she must have been in. She just kept going, step by step, as if there was no other choice but to survive. I could feel myself pushing myself harder than I ever had before, trying to keep up with her determination. But even as my own strength waned, I refused to stop. I couldn't afford to. Lyra needed me. We needed each other. As we neared the base of the mountains, I could see the faint outline of a narrow pass that led up into the higher elevations. The mountains loomed over us, their snow-capped peaks rising sharply against the sky. We could take that pass and climb toward the summit. The higher ground would give us a better vantage point, a clearer view of the surroundings. But it was a risky move. The terrain was unstable, the weather unpredictable. Still, it was our best shot. "We'll go this way," I said, pointing toward the pass. Lyra looked up at it, her brow furrowing for a moment as if she were weighing the decision in her mind. "It's dangerous," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I know," I replied, "but it's our only chance. We need to see what's out there." Without another word, she nodded, and together, we began making our way toward the pass. The climb was tough, and every step felt like it took twice the effort. The air was thinner here, making it harder to breathe, and I could feel the weight of the exhaustion pressing down on me. But we kept going, one foot in front of the other. As we climbed, the wind picked up again, swirling around us and making the climb even more treacherous. But we couldn't turn back now. We had come too far. My mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. What if we couldn't make it to the top? What if we were too late? What if no one ever came for us? But I couldn't let those thoughts take over. I had made a promise to Lyra. We would get through this together. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the top of the pass. I stopped, gasping for breath, and looked out over the vast expanse of the planet. The view was breathtaking, but it was also sobering. The mountains stretched on endlessly in every direction, the land covered in snow and ice. But far in the distance, on the horizon, I thought I saw something. A glint of light, perhaps the reflection of something metallic in the sun. My heart raced as I focused on it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Do you see that?" I asked Lyra, pointing toward the horizon. She squinted against the wind, her sharp eyes following my gaze. "I see it," she said, her voice filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. "What is it?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if it was just a trick of the light or something more. But I couldn't ignore it. It could be our chance. It could be the signal we had been waiting for. Without another word, I started moving toward it, my legs aching with every step, but driven by something deeper now. I glanced back at Lyra, and she was right behind me, her face set in determination. We didn't speak, but I could feel the shift between us. The trust she had shown me, the trust one had placed in her. It was like a thread connecting us, pulling us forward, even when everything else seemed uncertain. The light ahead flickered again, and this time, I was sure. It was something real. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding with hope. We were almost there. I could feel it. We weren't alone anymore. This was the sign we had been waiting for. The rescue was coming. I could feel the weight of each step as we made our way toward the distant light, my breath sharp and shallow from both the cold and the exertion. The landscape around us was still, almost too still, the snow crunching under our boots with each movement. Lyra stayed close behind me, her presence a quiet reassurance. It was as though the cold, the harsh environment, and the uncertainty of our situation no longer mattered. We were moving forward, together, and that gave me something to hold on to. The light grew brighter as we got closer, and my pulse quickened with every step. It was no longer just a glint. It was real, tangible. It was something out here in the vast emptiness, something that had to be a sign. We had to be close now. The wind was picking up again, but the light seemed to cut through the storm like a beacon, guiding us toward it. I turned to Lyra, her face set in determination. She was clearly exhausted, but there was no slowing her down now. Whatever that light was, it had reignited something in both of us. We didn't stop until we reached it. And when we did, we came face to face with a structure, small, inconspicuous, but unmistakably man-made. The light came from a small, weathered building, its metal frame half buried in the snow. There were no signs of life at first glance, but I didn't care. This was our chance. I moved toward the entrance, my heart pounding with anticipation. Lyra followed, and for the first time in days, I felt a sliver of hope. We approached the door slowly, the creaking of the hinges as I pushed it open echoing in the silence. Inside, the air was warmer, the contrast to the freezing cold outside almost a relief. I could see a few basic supplies scattered around the small room, as if someone had been here recently. But still, there was no sign of life. "Hello," I called out, my voice hoarse from the dry air. No answer. I looked back at Lyra, who was scanning the room, her eyes sharp as ever. "Do you think someone's here?" she asked, her voice low. "I don't know," I replied, my voice uncertain. "But we can't take any chances." I moved further into the room, my eyes darting over the supplies and the various equipment that had been left behind. It looked like this place had been used recently, but it was abandoned now. I checked the small terminal in the corner, my fingers moving over the controls with quick, practiced motions. The screen flickered to life, and I almost didn't believe it when I saw the communication signal. It was weak, but it was there. Someone had been here, and they had sent a signal out, just like we had. My hands shook as I activated the communication system, sending a message into the empty space, hoping against hope that it would be received. "This is Jake," I said, my voice steady despite the rising excitement. "We need assistance. We are stranded on the surface of this planet. Coordinates." I paused, quickly checking the readout before continuing. "Coordinates 42.5 degrees north, 87.3 degrees east. Please respond." I sat back, staring at the terminal, waiting for a response. Lyra stepped up beside me, her eyes watching the screen with intensity. "Do you think they'll answer?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer at first, my mind racing. The thought that we might not be alone anymore was almost too much to comprehend. But then the terminal beeped. I looked down, my heart pounding in my chest as the screen flickered again, this time showing a response. It was a garbled transmission, the words distorted by static, but it was enough to hear. "Receiving. Hold on. Help is coming. Stay there." The message was brief, fragmented, but it was real. Someone had heard us. I looked up at Lyra, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw her eyes soften. She didn't smile, but the relief on her face was clear. "We're going to make it," I whispered, almost to myself, before turning back to the terminal. The message had been short, but it was enough to bring hope back into our hearts. We weren't alone anymore, and that was enough to keep going. I watched the terminal screen, waiting for any sign that the message had been received. Every second felt like an eternity. The static buzzed in the background, the silence pressing down on us as we stood there, frozen in anticipation. Then, finally, the screen flickered again. The response was slow to load, but it was there. My heart skipped a beat. The words appeared, garbled and broken, but they were enough to ignite the spark of hope. "Help is on the way. Hold tight. We've sent coordinates. Stay there. Don't move." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Someone had heard us. Someone was coming. The weight that had been pressing on my chest lifted slightly, and I glanced at Lyra. Her face was unreadable, but I could see the glint in her eyes, the same glint I had seen when we had first met, the fierce determination, the quiet strength. For a moment, she said nothing, just stood there, watching me, watching the screen. Then, slowly, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did it. You got us a response." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but at the same time, there was a part of me that couldn't fully believe it. We weren't safe yet. We still had to survive, and we didn't know when help would arrive or what the situation outside would be like. There were so many unknowns. But for now, this was something to hold on to. I turned back to the terminal, checking the status of the signal once more. The connection was stable, but the response time was slow. The weather still hadn't fully cleared, and the distance we were from the nearest base meant that every transmission took longer to get through. Still, it didn't matter. We had made contact. That was what mattered. "We can wait," I said finally, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "We just need to stay put, conserve what we have, and wait for them to find us." Lyra didn't argue, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't someone who liked to wait, someone who liked to rely on others. She was used to doing things on her own. But this time, it was different. We were in this together. The winds outside picked up again, the storm showing no signs of letting up. But inside, the shelter was warm, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I let myself relax, just for a moment. I allowed myself to believe that we might actually make it. We weren't alone, and that thought gave me the strength to keep going. I sat down next to Lyra, letting the silence settle between us. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a shared moment of peace in the midst of chaos. She didn't need to say anything. I knew what she was thinking. We both knew that we couldn't stay here forever. But, for now, we had done what we could. We had made it this far. And somehow, in the pit of my stomach, I knew that we would make it out of this. We had each other, and we had hope. That was enough. Thank you, Lyra said after a long pause. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though she wasn't sure how to put her gratitude into words. I turned to her, surprised. What for? She met my gaze, her eyes steady. For staying. For not giving up on me. I felt my chest tighten. There was so much more I wanted to say, but the words didn't come. Instead, I just nodded. I'm not going anywhere, I said quietly. Not ever. And for the first time since we had crash-landed on this unforgiving planet, I truly believed it. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. And together, we would find a way out.